Rox Madigan wasn't supposed to survive the shuttle drop, let alone orientation. The Zarn Dominion officers handling her intake, Vlor and Trix, twin masters of smug and certified gravity prank connoisseurs, had chuckled themselves into a wheezing fit as they flagged her as Class F fragile meatbag and redirected her sleeping quarters to a Triple G training pod. Standard protocol for fresh galactic recruits who needed to learn their place, which, in the Warforge hierarchy, was usually somewhere between floor stain and morale hazard. Except Rox didn't exactly crawl into her quarters weeping like a melted marshmallow. Instead, she walked in, sized up the gravity like it owed her money, dropped into a set of one-armed push-ups, and asked the room AI if it had a setting called Titan Crush. When the AI hesitated, she added, "I'll wait. Stretching's important." By the time she was doing handstand burpees while chewing on a protein bar labeled "Emergency Ration, Do Not Ingest," the security feeds lit up like Christmas, on caffeine. The Warforges Orientation Committee, an overpaid panel of war veterans, paper pushers, and one sentient species of judgmental moss, collectively leaned in, confused and mildly aroused by fear. Lieutenant Rox Madigan, former U.S. Navy SEAL and currently Earth's quiet middle finger to galactic norms, had not just passed the prank, she'd weaponized it. Her arrival rippled through the Tarkalian Warforge like a gym fart during silent meditation. Instructors whispered. Cadets posted shaky videos of her power-lunging uphill while singing old Earth pop lyrics through gritted teeth. The cafeteria's dishware union threatened to strike after she crushed a carbonadium meal tray to adjust her wrist strength. Day 2. She asked to swap roommates because the AI didn't snore with personality. Instead, she was assigned to a gelatinous life form from Sector Bloop, known as Larry, technically an aquatic vaporous cohesion unit, but she called him Slime Bay. Larry, a transparent blob who glowed when nervous and shook like a chihuahua, in a freezer whenever anyone said combat, quickly became Rox's unofficial pet project. She introduced him to squats. The resulting wiggle nearly short-circuited the floor sensors. Vlor and Trix, now relegated to training observer duty, watched in stunned horror as the woman they'd tried to prank became a walking, sarcastic phenomenon. Meanwhile, Rox wasn't just mocking the entire system, she was metabolizing it. She questioned every command, rewrote her own drills, and marked up training manuals with phrases like, "Try harder, meet slugs," and, "Is this obstacle course sponsored by disappointment?" The instructors tried countermeasures. First, they cut her meals to alien-approved portions. So, she grew her own algae protein in a boot. Then, they assigned her to psychological reconditioning. The AI therapist resigned after session 3, citing emotional damage and unprofessional levels of sarcasm. Word spread. The legend of the human who treated the Warforge like a poorly lit CrossFit center began to grow. On the 5th day, the Warforge's Emergency Council, which hadn't convened since the cafeteria served sentient clams, called a closed-door meeting to discuss the Madigan situation. High Marshal Grox, a slab of granite in a uniform with the personality of a frustrated printer, demanded answers. "Is she augmented?" he bellowed. "Genetically enhanced?" "Sir," replied one trembling officer, "she's just like that." Grox growled, then watched the latest security feed. Rox lifting Larry like a kettlebell while quoting Shakespeare and flexing for a passing instructor. She named the slime. She gave it a gym schedule. Grox blinked. "She's domesticated." The anxiety blob. Outside the chamber, Rox was casually helping a group of quad-limbed first-years through a terrain crawl. When one asked if humans needed motivational slogans, she replied, "Pain is just weakness leaving the bureaucracy." The cadet cried. Rox handed him a towel. "Now wipe those feelings off and go faster." In just under a week, she wasn't just surviving the galaxy's most elite war academy. She was bench-pressing its entire reputation. And she hadn't even unpacked her boots. Earth had sent a soldier. The galaxy had received a sarcastic apocalypse in tactical gear, and the Tarkalian Warforge, for the first time in recorded history, was unsure whether to salute her or run. By the time the sunless rotation cycle of the Tarkalian Warforge hit its 7th grueling day, Rox Madigan had already derailed 2 command meetings, inspired a fashion trend among alien cadets based entirely on her habit of cutting off uniform sleeves, and inadvertently caused a minor religious crisis when the cult of the 12 tentacle descendants declared her the one who squats through pain. She was unfazed. While the rest of the academy was busy adapting to her presence like it was an incoming plague of competence and sarcasm, Rox was busy annihilating the obstacle course with all the effort of someone speedwalking to a clearance sale. On the wall of endurance, where most cadets clung and cried like slippery noodles, Rox executed vertical cartwheels, casually sipping from a hydration tube that smelled suspiciously like cold brew coffee. The course's final trial, known as the Canyon of Tactical Despair, involved navigating blindfolded through an electrified maze of fire-spitting drones and whining motivational AIs. Rox modified hers to play Taylor Swift remixes and emerged on the other end with one eyebrow raised and only mild singeing. Word of her absurd efficiency spread faster than a cafeteria rumor, and within hours, she was trending across 5 planets under the hashtag #OneDeathByPushup. Her fellow cadets ranged from awestruck to existentially shattered. One Crunchalon, a proud species known for their chitinous exoskeletons and inability to handle emotional feedback, had to be medically extracted from a locker after Rox told him his war cry sounded like a blender with low self-esteem. Meanwhile, instructors attempted to diagnose her. They brought in biometric scanners, hormone sniffers, and even a retired telepathic fungus to read her psyche, but all anyone got was a headache and a sarcastic shrug. "Have you tried turning your expectations off and back on again?" she asked one psych officer while planking across 3 gravity zones. The only being unfazed by her presence was Larry, her gelatinous roommate, who now referred to her as Coach Madigan, and had gained 6 ounces of mass from his new protein goo diet. He accompanied her to every training session, cheering, via damp little squeaks and wobbles, which only fueled the rumor that Rox had domesticated a weaponized ooze. The Commandant, High Marshal Grox, began to spiral. His elite academy, once a place where cadets cried blood and called it growth, had become an interstellar circus of memes, morale, and unauthorized dance-offs. And Rox, she wasn't just surviving it. She was lifting it, mocking it, and repurposing every challenge into a warm-up set. Her latest offense? She converted the emergency lockdown chamber into a personal sauna/gravity training den. When questioned, she explained it was cheaper than therapy and smelled less like failure. At the weekly status review, where instructors typically shared casualty stats and trauma assessments, the only major note was, Madigan convinced the war drone to do yoga. The drone, a 300-kilo killbot named H-34T, now greeted her with namaste and brought her snacks. Diplomats from the Zarn Dominion began issuing polite, increasingly desperate inquiries. "Is she standard?" Earth's official reply came via encrypted laughter and a meme of Rox bench-pressing a council member. The Academy Board demanded she be humbled. So they created a new tier of evaluation called Operation Please Let Her Bleed. It was confidential. It was classified. It was designed to break her. The first test? Combat simulations turned up to 11, with randomized weather, sensory disorientation, and an opponent named Groovok, the Ankle Snatcher, a beast infamous for chewing through armored instructors and weeping after. Rox won in 7 minutes. She didn't break a sweat. She broke Groovok's sense of self. He's now in therapy. The next opponent was a flying serpentine menace that could phase through walls and spit plasma. Rox wrapped it in towels mid-flight and grounded it with a deadpan "You're grounded." The beast, now called Gerald, delivers her mail. At this point, the instructors had resorted to stress baking and meditation apps. She was warping the Academy's very definition of hardship, rewriting its legends with one-liners and flexes. Cadets began quoting her during drills. "Do it for rocks," they'd whisper before leaping into flaming pit challenges. The commandant issued a formal decree to suppress her influence. It was leaked, rewritten as a motivational poster, and printed across bunk walls with the tagline, "Adapt, Mock, Dominate." As the days passed, it became increasingly clear. Rox Madigan wasn't just surviving the Warforge, she was turning it into a boot camp run by a personal trainer with a grudge and a subscription to sarcasm. The Warforge's leadership was now in full-blown tactical denial, deploying strategy after strategy under the unspoken title, Operation, Please Just Let Her Lose Once, for the Love of the Nebula. Part of the desperation stemmed from the cadet morale reports, which now included direct quotes like, "I believe in gravity again, because she made it cry," and "Lieutenant Madigan yelled at my trauma until it quit." Meanwhile, the Academy's instructors, once revered across the galaxy for their iron resolve and spine-snapping traditions, were rapidly becoming reluctant spectators in the Rox Madigan show. To address the embarrassment, a new trial was cobbled, together from the most lethal, banned, and morally questionable segments of galactic combat evaluation. It was simply titled Gauntlet 66, because Make It Stop was deemed too honest. Gauntlet 66 was legendary even in whispers, an experimental combat sequence originally shut down by the Interstellar Ethics Board due to excessive meltdowns, interspecies therapy demands, and the spontaneous formation of support groups. Rox was scheduled for a solo run, because no one else qualified unless they wanted their atoms rearranged. The gauntlet began with a six-limbed, tusked rock creature known as Krorgarth the Pulverizer, armed with a gravity mace and a personal vendetta against anything squishy. Rox, wearing fingerless gloves and chewing a stick of gum like it owed her rent, sidestepped him with the grace of a dance instructor, slapped his flank with a towel she'd borrowed from Larry, and whispered, "That's not muscle, that's misplaced ambition." Krorgarth tripped over his own ego and had to be wheeled out by medbots. The next phase introduced a trio of flying electro-serpents capable of phasing through dimensions and screaming in 3 pitches at once. Rox blinked twice, pulled out 2, glow sticks and a flash grenade, and screamed louder. The serpents panicked mid-air, mistimed their synchronized screech, and crashed into each other like malfunctioning fireworks. A spontaneous rave broke out in the spectator stands. But it was the third challenge that sent the instructors into a silent, collective stress coma, a shape-shifting goo champion known as Vlex. Vlex could mimic any weapon, any form, and had absorbed battle techniques from 57 galactic cultures. Rox walked in, looked Vlex over like he was a knockoff brand, and smirked, "Bet you melt under pressure." What followed was 23 seconds of combat poetry. She baited Vlex into mimicking her form, then locked him in a combat loop of his own failed counters, essentially making him spar against her recorded moves. When he began to destabilize, she activated a localized thermal feedback loop with her suit and calmly added, "You just got jellied." Vlex splattered himself into a corner and now only communicates in bubbles. From the observation chamber, High Marshal Grox watched in silence, his jaw clenched tighter than his uniform buttons. Behind him, an emergency therapist offered emotional support granola. Even the war drone H-34T, now Rox's self-appointed hype bot, played her entrance music as she walked out of the gauntlet chamber, tossing a frozen Vlex sample into a containment jar labeled room decor. Cadets erupted in cheers, not because of the spectacle, but because Rox had become something more than myth. She was therapy in the form of threat display. The Academy's entire doctrine began to crumble under the weight of her example. War manuals were revised. Simulations were recalibrated to Rox mode, a difficulty level currently rated existential. Instructors were being retrained in sarcasm detection. One nervous Flarn species recruit broke down crying in the mess, all because his food tray looked at him funny, and he wasn't sure if it was a prank or Rox in disguise. Earth's command watched all of this unfold via encrypted neural feeds and sent her a single-word ping: proceed. Rox responded by carving the word proceeding into the war table with a ceremonial fork. She wasn't just passing the EA tests, she was rewriting what the tests meant. Every opponent who stepped into the ring with her left fundamentally altered. Some went to therapy, some requested her autograph. One requested asylum on Earth under the title War Refugee of Sarcasm. And yet, she hadn't even used her full strength. She hadn't deployed tactics, hadn't tapped Earth's command-level overrides, hadn't even bothered opening her sealed mission brief. Rox was still in warm-up mode. And the galaxy was beginning to sweat. Graduation day at the Tarkalian Warforge arrived not with fanfare, but with the nervous shuffling of instructors who now wore emotional support exosuits. The hushed whispers of cadets who spoke Rox Madigan's name like it was both blessing and curse, and a vague dread that lingered in the recycled air like ozone before a supernova. The Academy's great ceremonial hall, usually a theater of booming ego and pompous tradition, now resembled the final act of a cosmic roast. High Marshal Grox stood at the podium, rigid as ever, though the fine cracks across his concrete hide suggested he'd been clenching for most of the past month. Behind him hovered the Grand Blade of Glory, a so-called weapon of honor that looked suspiciously like a chrome butter knife wearing a cape. Rox, in full human tactical armor, with her sleeves still defiantly ripped off, sauntered into the hall flanked by Larry the Slime Bay, now wearing a tiny sweatband, and the reformed murder drone H-34T, who carried her duffel like a loyal gym bro. As she walked, she passed the shattered egos of former rivals, each of whom nodded like survivors of a very specific emotional war. Grox tried to summon what remained of his dignity and boomed, "Lieutenant Madigan, for your performance, you have been awarded top honors." Rox tilted her head, chewing gum like it was a threat. "Performance? That was me on power-saving mode." A collective nervous laugh rippled through the audience. Grox grunted and handed her the Blade of Glory, holding it like it might explode. Rox examined it, flicked it twice, and muttered, "Neat letter opener. I'll keep it near my toaster." The moment was interrupted by a flash across the upper dome. A priority-coded message from Earth Command appeared on Rox's neural HUD. It was short, but devastatingly clear. Phase 1 complete. Initiate Phase 2. Dominate the diplomats. Her smirk widened like a planetary fault line. She turned toward the galactic dignitaries in the audience. Smug Zarn officials, twitchy Flarn interpreters, a Yerg ambassador chewing his own eyebrows, and raised the blade slightly. "Just curious," she said casually. "Do you guys offer gluten-free chaos? Because I've got a few dietary restrictions when it comes to red tape and arrogance." Somewhere in the back, a Flarbthox delegate fainted. The Academy's streaming feed, long believed to be private, had been hijacked, not by Earth, but by the cadets themselves, who had uploaded every moment of Rox's training, her takedowns, her towel duels, her motivational beatdowns, and her growing collection of bizarre catchphrases. The clips had gone viral across 12 star systems. Galactic militaries began reassessing their protocols, redrafting definitions of resilience, and most terrifying of all, scheduling visits to Earth. Grox, now visibly sweating dust, attempted to regain control of the ceremony. "Let it be known," he declared, voice faltering, "that the Tarkalian Warforge recognizes humanity as a capable, if unorthodox, species of strategic gym goblins," Rox interjected. "We prefer the term gym goblins." As laughter rippled and the Zarn delegation reached for diplomatic antacids, Grox sighed, muttering to himself, "By the spires, she's made war into a wellness trend." At that exact moment, the ceiling opened, not metaphorically but literally, as a dropship descended through the ornamental skylight. It bore the Earth Defense Cooperative insignia and a blaring sound system that played an instrumental remix of Eye of the Tiger. Out stepped a 3-star general in mirrored shades, holding a clipboard that just said, "Next phase, galactic infiltration through casual excellence." Rox saluted with 2 fingers and a wink. Larry gurgled something excitedly. H-34T through Confetti. Grox crumbled, emotionally and literally, as his structural integrity gave out with a soft crack. Rox turned to the assembled crowd, held up the blade of glory, and declared, "I came, I saw, I did pull-ups until your reality cracked. Now, who's ready for a team-building retreat involving diplomatic protocol, sarcasm, and maybe orbital kettlebells?" The feed cut to black, but not before one last close-up. Rox grinning directly into the camera, sweat glowing, mud-streaked, gum still intact, with a caption that simply read, "Adapt, mock, dominate." The galaxy had been warned, and it wasn't ready.